Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to All Era Sports with Sirhan on this Friday, the 6th of February, 2026. So I come to you live on a cold and frigid night in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. And just hoping everyone had themselves a wonderful day today and a wonderful upcoming weekend coming up. Of course, it is Super Bowl weekend coming up this Sunday. I already made my pick to reiterate. I made it twice, once on my show, once on NFL Gridiron last night. Just can't see anything that the New England Patriots can do to make this a competitive game or any kind of a competitive standout or make this a competitive of some sorts. Because anything that the New England Patriots are going to try to do, the Seattle Seahawks are going to have an answer. They make few mistakes. They're so disciplined out there. And the speed on defense is going to be too much. And I don't know how New England's going to find a way to generate points. And unless the Seahawks offense falls off the rails, expect them to hoist the Lombardi trophy. As I said, the best team all year has always been in the NFC, and the last one standing is Seattle. And I expect that to be the conclusion Sunday night. So that takes care of the Super Bowl pick. I just get that out of the way. Lots to get to tonight, but we start, of course, with a sad note in the NFL. One of the ultra premier quarterbacks in NFL history passed earlier today. We are talking about the great Sonny Jurgensen. Born as Christian Adolf Sonny Jurgensen III, played his collegiate ball at Duke, and in his career at Duke, you're talking about a guy who was one of the better quarterbacks, and at that time led Duke to a 7-2-1 record with a ACC championship in 1955. Couldn't go in because the automatic bid went to Maryland under some odd circumstances, but he took over. And then we talk about his run at the NFL level. His NFL career spanned over almost 18 years, spending time with both Philadelphia and Washington. And at a time when it was a run-heavy league, Jurgensen had the distinction of being a gunslinger. And you're talking about a passer rating a shade under 83, which is before the pre-1978 era, where a lot of things changed at that point. He led the NFL in passing yards on 5 separate seasons. And in 1961, had the season record of 3,723 yards and 32 touchdowns at a time when that wasn't even thought of. And you're talking about a gunslinger's era, and a run-heavy era, and one of the premier gunslingers of that run-heavy era was none other than Sonny Jurgensen. We talk about his time at both Philly and Washington, and he talk about his overall career numbers: over 32,000 yards, 250 touchdowns, and 5 times selected to the Pro Bowl. And his career accolades, awards are through the roof. You're talking about winning the NFL title in 1960, a 2-time first-team All-Pro in 1961 and 1969, second-team All-Pro in 64 and 67. As I said, the 5-time passing yards leader on 5 separate occasions, twice in 1961 and 1967, led the league in touchdowns, the passer rating leader in 1967, and a part of the 1960s All-Decade team, and whose number 9 was retired in Washington back in 2022, and is a part of the Philadelphia Eagles Hall of Fame. And after his career was over, went to the booth to become a color commentator, teaming up with the one-time Hall of Fame linebacker Sam Huff to cover the Washington team on local radio. It continued to cover for local Washington television from 94 till 2008. The only reason why it didn't go on was because of budget cuts. Show was canceled. And Sonny Jurgensen was a staple. And we talk about Washington football, whatever team you want to name it, for its time, the name Sonny Jurgensen was it. And the world lost a premier all-time great. And we talk about what made Sonny Jurgensen great. Let's start with this. You're talking about a golden arm who had high level accuracy and velocity at a time when the NFL was known as the dead ball era, a period from 1960 to 1977, which was known for less passing rules than we see today and playing against real stingy defenses, and defenses could do what they wanted back then. And Sonny Jurgensen was putting up numbers. When we talk about that era, those numbers were substantial and absolutely tremendous given the era he was in. And Vince Lombardi once called this guy the best quarterback he'd ever seen. And if he had Sonny Jurgensen on his teams, he would never lose a game. That's sick of a whole lot when you talk about coming from the mouth of the great Vince Lombardi. And among many other things of Sonny Jurgensen, another thing that made him great was just how he was dedicated to his craft. And we talk about his runs, had some, not just some great runs at Washington, had some solid runs in Philadelphia also. And we talk about his time in Philly from 1957 to 1963. You're talking about a guy who was Philadelphia backing up Bobby Thomason in 1957 and Norm Van Brocklin from 1958 to 1960. And after all of that, that was when he found himself on the starting rotation for the Philadelphia Eagles because Van Brocklin retired in 1961, and he took over as Philadelphia starter and had us. And that year was when he threw for 3,700 yards and 32 touchdowns and made first team All Pro. That's what made Sonny Jurgensen one of a kind. And he really took off when he went to Washington. The capper, of course, when he won the NFL championship in 1970. And it was a tough blow for the Washington football community because that number 9 is staying in this rafters, probably the most impactful player in Washington football history. And at that point, I mean, he was just putting up numbers. And again, mind you, this is not today where anybody can put up numbers. Back in the 60s, before 78, before they had every freaking rules change where you could throw 20 flags a game, they were letting you play. And Sonny Jurgensen was throwing 3,700 yards in what was called as a run-heavy league back then. And 3,700 yards back then was basically the gunslinger mentality, and that's what Sonny Jurgensen was. And the NFL lost a great one today. And may those around Jurgensen, the family, and the Washington fans and the Washington football team have their condolences to them. And the world lost a tremendous quarterback. Probably a top 20 all-time great quarterback. Not talked about enough. We consider the era he came in. But one of those guys who probably could hang with anyone. Because remember, he was putting up numbers in a different era. At a time when there was a lot of physicality allowed compared to what we know today. And that's why Sonny Jurgensen was something substantial and certainly a one-of-a-kind talent. And when you have Vince Lombardi calling you the best you ever seen, that should tell you what Sonny Jurgensen was. May God rest the soul of the great Sonny Jurgensen. Tremendous, not just a tremendous player, great time at the booth, especially for the Washington teams, and a stand-up personality. Went to the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame in 1971, the Duke Sports Hall of Fame in 1979, Pro Bowler 1983. It was rated a top 10 figure from North Carolina and became a member of the Wilmington's Walk of Fame in 2004. And his number 9 was retired in 2022. That should tell you the legacy of Sonny Jurgensen. Sometimes I starting shows up on sad notes, but I had to do it. Now we get to the crux of what's going on in the NFL, of course, last night. 2 things that took place. Let's start with the obvious one. It was the NFL awards. Lots of yippee, yap, yap from those people up at in the Northeastern Atlantic when it comes to Drake May being slighted from the award by Matthew Stafford. Look, Drake May had a heck of a year. But when you consider what Matthew Stafford went through to get to that point in a tougher conference, and most notably in a tougher division, and the NFC West where had 3 teams make the playoffs with at least 11 wins, that's the tip of the iceberg. And I said I thought Drake May would have gotten the award, but my vote would have gone to Matthew Stafford, and here's why. You haven't seen quarterbacks at that age play at the level he did, and put up the numbers he did, and still managed to win 12-plus games. The only thing that went wrong was they played in the NFC West, where the cream of that division was the Seattle Seahawks, and we know the story of that one. But to come back at 37, when earlier in the year, people wondered whether this guy could stay healthy and still put up the numbers he did and still become an elite level quarterback still at his age, speaks to the greatness of Matthew Stafford. And a lot of people are saying should this guy go in the Hall of Fame? He wrapped it up a long time ago. Anything with this MVP might solidify him as a first ballot when his time comes up, because he was putting up the numbers. They were winning games. It's just they were in the most difficult division and difficult conference, and that was the tip of the iceberg. People are going to say because he was the 5th seed, he shouldn't have got it. You know, if they played in the AFC, they more likely would have been the 2nd seed, because they won 13 games, and of course they handled the Panthers and the Bears. It gave Seattle all they can handle for most of that game of the NFC title game. And the reason for it was Matthew Stafford. And that's why he was worthy of the distinction of the National Football League MVP for the 2025 NFL season. And no disputes out of me. And all you guys in Foxborough, just understand this. I get it. You guys have a sensational talent in Drake May. I'm not going to say he's not, because that's just stupid. He's going to get a share of MVPs at some point. He'll get 1 or 2 at some point. But when you consider the totality of what Matthew Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams went through in the NFC West, in the same division that had both the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers surpass 11 wins at the minimum, and many other teams in the NFC who had 10-plus wins, that should tell you why the MVP went to him. And to do it at the age he did it, to put up the numbers at the age he did, and when people were questioning whether the guy could make it through a healthy season, that alone should tell you why the right winner of that award was Matthew Stafford. If Drake May is a young talent, he had a good, outstanding regular season. He'll probably get some down the line. But all you guys in the Northeast Atlantic need to chill out, because it's not the end of the world that he didn't win it. You guys have a Super Bowl to play coming up Sunday. I'd be worried about that than an MVP award, because if you're more concerned about an MVP award than a Super Bowl, it says tons about you guys over there in the Northeastern Atlantic and that fan base, because you have bigger fish to fry. What about team accomplishments, not individual accomplishments? Case closed. Again, I thought May was going to get it. I wouldn't have a problem with it. But Matthew Stafford earned it, and it was great that the voters understood it and rewarded what was earned, not what was given. So that's what we have. We talk about this particular NFL Honors Awards. Other awards to touch on, I'll just get through this real quick. A few of these were no-brainers. Jackson Smith-Njigba, the Offensive Player of the Year. Going to touch on that award here in a second, especially because Bengals fans have their panties all up in a bunch. I'll get to that in a minute. Coach of the Year, Mike Vrabel. I don't have a problem with it. I would have voted Mike McDonald, but given that the New England Patriots were at the bottom feeder and nobody thought they would win the AFC East, let alone come out of the AFC, it's understandable why he won it. So I'm not going to argue that one. My vote would have gone to Mike McDonald, but I can't argue it. But I'll say this. For all 5 NFL coaches, they all were worthy of that award because all 5 of them had surprisingly strong seasons. Not just, Vrabel and McDonald. Ben Johnson in Chicago, Liam Cohen in Jacksonville, and Kyle Shanahan of San Francisco, they all were worthy of the award, but it's understood why Mike Vrabel won it. And you're not going to get an argument out of me, even though my vote would have gone to Mike McDonald. Assistant of the Year is an interesting one. It went to Josh McDaniels. That's interesting. I mean, but I thought they should have gone to Clint Kubiak for the job he did in Seattle. But I get it also. He made Drake May an MVP candidate. And we know the work he did in New England as an O coordinator for Tom Brady for many years. So it's probably a lifetime achievement award for him. There's only way I can circumvent that one. But again, my vote would have gone to Clint Kubiak, but it is what it is. Defensive Player of the Year, that was a no-brainer. It was Myles Garrett, the sack record, among many other things. And the last one I'm going to touch on is the back up here. I'm sorry, I went blank for a second. The Offensive Rookie of the Year to Terry McMillan. Interesting cast, but he was a rightful winner. And a Comeback Player of the Year, which should be called the Joe Burrow Comeback Player of the Year because he's the only one that knows how to win it. The only exception is this year. It went to the right guy. That was Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, who continues to show when he's healthy, he's the gold standard of NFL running backs. So that's that in a nutshell. I'll be touching on the Offensive Player of the Year situation because the Bengals fans want to bring themselves into it. I'll put that thing to bed in a little bit. Now to the Hall of Fame process and the Hall of Fame inductees of 2025. Lots to get to with this one. Well, we know what happened earlier with Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft. We know the story of that one, so I'm going to isolate it. I said my piece on Belichick twice already. I'm not going to reiterate it a third time. Robert Kraft probably falls in the same situation, but again, I'll wait till another time to talk about it. Let's talk about the guys who are in and deserve it. Well, let's start with Drew Brees, premier quarterback at the back end of the 2000s with the New Orleans Saints. Of course, had great years with the San Diego Chargers before he went over to New Orleans. Worthy candidate. Of course, Larry Fitzgerald, the premier wide receiver of his time, probably the greatest hands for any wide receiver at that time. It was always throw it up anywhere. Larry Fitzgerald can catch it. That was Larry Fitzgerald. Congratulations to him. Luke Kuechly of the Carolina Panthers, standout linebacker. Some people are mixed about it. I don't have a problem with it. He was worthy of it. So congratulations to him. Adam Vinatieri. Glad to see kickers get some love. And Adam Vinatieri certainly did that. Big time clutch kicks when the lights were brightest. Maybe the biggest big game clutch kicker in NFL history. And he showed it time after time with the New England Patriots having 2 walk-off Super Bowl win field goals. And the times with the Indianapolis Colts. He certainly was well-deserved. And one of the staples of the San Francisco 80s, the 49ers run of the 80s, the great Roger Craig, finally getting his long sought overdue. And this should have happened a long time ago, and it's well-deserved. I mean, a lot of people are going to nitpick it, but it was he earned it. It was probably getting close to expiration date status, which you should have got in earlier. But he's in. That's taken care of. They can move on from it and focus on other running backs who are worthy of the distinction, because there are quite a few, which we touched on somewhere down the line. And of course, some of the stories is, some of the ones that aren't in, I'm not even going to elaborate on it because some of them pretty much said, God's willing, they'll get in at some point. Which touches on one thing. It's once again an inconsistent NFL process. It's just like some of the Hall of Fame processes, which I don't know what the select criteria is, so don't ask me about it. But somewhere down the line, we have some glaring omissions that require a hardcore explanation as to why they're not in there. And we know that what happened earlier this week. We talk about Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft. You know the story of all of that. And an explanation has to be given, an honest one. That's all we want. And of course, the Pro Football Hall of Fame basically put a pressure saying, get it straight, or we're going to have to find some new voters. And we're about to find out over the next several years, because the ballots are about to get thicker. Some of the who's who is going to be on those ballots. And there's the people that are left out for now, makes you wonder if they're ever going to get in. And I can throw a lot of names out there, but I'm not going to use a platform to talk about names because there's a ton of them. We're going to find out soon because the ballots are going to be thicker with just as much deserving candidates as some of the ones in the past who are not in the Hall of Fame. And it's going to get real interesting. I mean, everybody could say they had a great career, but it's something special when we talk about giving a Hall of Fame career. And we're going to find out what the bar for the Pro Football Hall of Fame is coming up soon, because you're going to have some key names with some interesting backgrounds, good and bad, going to be on that ballot, and we're going to see who gets in and who doesn't. Case closed. Now, speaking of yapping about the Hall of Fame process and the NFL awards process, here we are in February, and once again, the cowardice of the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media show themselves for a boatload of reasons, and here we go again. Just when the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media can't stoop to any new low, they find a way to stoop to new lows. Let's start with the first one. I'm going to knock this down piece by piece by piece because there's a handful of these. The first yap is Jackson Smith-Njigba winning the Offensive Player of the Year when last year's Triple Crown winner Ja'Marr Chase didn't have a vote. It's simple math. One guy won 9 games and missed the playoffs. The other guy was the number 1 seed in the NFC, the toughest conference in the NFL, the number 1 seed in the toughest division in the NFL, and that's why he was a winner of that award. It's simple math. Let's get that out of the way. Now, no one's saying they would take Jackson Smith-Njigba over Ja'Marr Chase, because I wouldn't. I'd take Ja'Marr Chase over 10 Jackson Smith-Njigbas. And it's not a slight on Jackson Smith-Njigba. Ja'Marr Chase is a generational talent. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, the year he had, I mean, what he did up there in the Northwest is just cannot be overlooked. And the cowardice of Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media to degrade the accomplishment that Jackson Smith-Njigba had this year says a lot to the lows they stooped to. And it's just a recurring process to where, once again, they feel like they have to need to speak an opinion on something that is totally irrelevant to them, is totally useless to them, and they should be focused on a Super Bowl bust year in 2026, given the contracts of the 3-star players they paid several years ago. That's that part. So it's not a fact that, they feel like Ja'Marr Chase got slighted. No, Ja'Marr Chase did not get slighted. You win a Triple Crown and you don't make the playoffs. What good is winning a Triple Crown? It's basically useless. Even Ja'Marr Chase said, I'd rather play in the postseason. That's one thing the cowardice of Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media doesn't get. So that takes that one off. The second one, this is going to be a fun one. Well, I'm going to have the time of my life with this. They're yapping about Justin Herbert getting 1 MVP vote this season when Joe Burrow, who had a very good 2024 season and a great one, got no votes. And now they're playing victim because they think the NFL is out to get them with their narcissism and their cowardice and their cowardly thinking the NFL is against them. Justin Herbert made the playoffs 2 straight years, while Joe Burrow, after being paid $275 million, has missed the playoffs 3 straight years. That's the difference. And no one's saying Justin Herbert should have won the MVP. No one's saying that. If you're complaining about a voting process that leads to nowhere, like the Bengals fans have complained about the voting process that got Jackson Smith-Njigba the Offensive Player of the Year and Justin Herbert 1 MVP vote, it speaks to the level of petty narcissism and cowardice of that entire fan base simply because they don't see the big picture. The big picture is all of those stats didn't get you anywhere. And no one is saying Justin Herbert was the MVP. All they say he got one vote. And if your complaint is one vote on something that didn't move the needle, what does that say about you as a narcissistic coward known as the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media? And we're again having this conversation about why you guys just want to show yourselves for irrelevant conversations. It's due to your narcissism. It's due to your cowardice. And you know those cool kids that sit in the corner and feel left out. That's the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media. Because everything's fixated on everybody else instead of their team. They feel like they need to be cowards, pick up the phone, get on social media, and yap about it. That is the Cincinnati Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media, because it shows day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out, since losing the 2022 AFC title game in Kansas City. And from that point, they find ways to stoop to new lows. They find ways to embarrass themselves even more. And they call the voting process a joke. The dead last group of people that should be calling anything a joke are the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media, because the real joke is them standing in front of a mirror. That's the real joke, not this process. No one said this process was perfect. No one even said that. But leave it to the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media to bring us up, because they show their cowardice and their narcissism. And that's why they want to put their nose in it. And that's why social media has had a fireworks over the past couple of days. No one said the process was perfect, but Bengals fans and Cincinnati media are the dead last group of people to complain about it, because they have no room and they haven't done anything of significance over the last 3 years. So congratulations, you made fool of yourselves. So let's shoot that one down. Now the last one. Actually, I'm going to go halfway with this one, because part of it, I get it. But the other part, I don't get it. They're calling the Hall of Fame process a joke. Then again, just like I said earlier, the dead last fan base should be calling anything a joke are the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media. Calling the Hall of Fame process a joke because Ken Anderson should be in their eyes, should be the Hall of Fame. And out of knowledge, I take their side on it. I think he should have a little time ago, but it is what it is. The problem isn't that. The problem is, once again, if you're going to call something a joke, make sure you have a leg to stand on. And the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media are the dead last group of people to call anything a joke, especially when it comes to this. I mean, the Hall of Fame process, I mean, I deal with it with boxing, and it's probably going to be the same way with pro football over the next few years. Can get real interesting. And there's some names that are going to be left out, and I get why they feel Ken Anderson should be in. And I said, I'm with them. I take their side on this one. But nobody's told me, or let me back up. The word joke will never come out of my mouth when it comes to the NFL voting process. Suspect? Yes. I mean, there's no brainer. Look what happened with Bill Belichick earlier in the week. Questionable? Yes. Same thing. Look what happened to Bill Belichick earlier in the week. If you're going to call something a joke, make sure you have a leg to stand on and make sure you know what the heck you're talking about. Because the last group of people to call anything regarding the NFL a joke are the Bengals fans and the Cincinnati media, because if they want to see a joke, all they have to do is stand in front of a mirror. That's a joke. That's all you have to know. Because they're complaining about certain players not going to the Hall of Fame that should have. And instead of worrying about who's going into the Hall of Fame, maybe you guys need to shut up and worry about a Super Bowl bust year in 2026, because that might take care of itself. That should be your focus, not who is in the Hall of Fame or not, and not the fact you guys are once again conducting yourselves like a bunch of joking cowards, thinking certain guys belong when they don't, and complaining about the voting process when you guys don't have a leg to stand on because you haven't made the playoffs. Congratulations. The NFL isn't out to get you. You guys are out to get yourselves, because you feel the need to force yourselves down people's throats. And because you want to force yourselves down people's throats, that's why you turn people away wrong. And that's why everything's happened the way it is. Maybe shut up, let the process play out, and we go from there. Yapping about it on social media and starting social media fights to how you carry yourselves like cowards and narcissists once again says a lot about who you guys are and less about the NFL process when it comes to the voting of certain awards and the Hall of Fame process, because that's never changed. That's the one thing that stayed constant, and that's never going to change, whether you guys like it or not. And at this point, I don't know what the heck to tell you other than to go get checked for CTE and go to go to rehab, because that's where you guys belong. All because you wanted the attention like a narcissist. And boy, Lex Luger would love to have a word with you about his character as a narcissist, because you guys act like that. But you have a season to prepare for in 2026, and it's Super Bowl or bust. When you shell out all that money to 3 players, that should be your focus. Maybe zip it, turn your attention to that, and we'll see what happens in the end. But anything else, you don't have a leg to stand on, because it's an act of egregious cowardice and narcissism. And I said all along about this fan base, they're the biggest group of Mike Brown puppets, and we resort to being puppets. You resort to this stuff because you guys are just hooked in and invested into what Mike Brown does, invested into what Elizabeth Blackburn does, and Katie Blackburn, and Zach Taylor, which is basically the Bengals captain and his wife, who are the 2 biggest Zach Taylor puppets. You guys just, this ideology of puppets, acting like puppets of ownership, it says a lot as to why you guys have the lack of character that you've lacked because of your puppetry. And there's a reason why I'm here, and you guys are so far up Mike Brown and Katie Blackburn's butt cheeks to where you would do anything for them and resort to being puppets and complaining about the voting process for the NFL MVP or Offensive Player of the Year and the Hall of Fame process just validates why you guys are just the biggest bunch of Mike Brown and Zach Taylor puppets. And it's narcissistic and it's cowardice. End of story. I can go another 10-minute rant if I want to, but I have bigger fish to fry. And we talk about bigger fish to fry. We're going to venture into the world of boxing historically tonight. One of the fights that we're going to be talking about is one of those fights where if you shoot your mouth off, you're going to get what you asked for. And that should happen to Bengals fans for the obvious reasons. But the perfect case of this took place 59 years ago tonight between Muhammad Ali and Ernie Terrell. And boy, we got a lot of story to talk about this one. Let's talk about, we know about Ali, so I won't give another podcast about Ali. I want to talk about Ernie Terrell for a minute. Because when you talk about the standout heavyweight Ernie Terrell, won a world title, competed for 16 years. 2 years he had one of the belts, solid heavyweight. Actually, a rare case of a guy over 6'6", which was a dime and a dozen back in those days. We talk about the fighter like Terrell, and carved up a solid career. Had a couple losses along the way, but he did manage to gather himself for the title run. When you talk about when he won the title from Eddie Manchin and beating guys like George Chuvalo and Doug Jones. And along the way, some of the wins he had are guys like Zorro Foley and Bob Foster. Yeah, the standout like heavyweight Bob Foster, who tried his luck in heavyweight, and Terrell just beat the brakes off of him. If you talk about a unique fighter, 6'6", and just fought some of the best heavyweights, maybe underrated and underappreciated during that time, because we talk about the 70s of the heavyweights back in the 60s and the early 70s, and it's basically the who's who. He's as good as all of them. And probably those guys who compete in any era. When you talk about the physique he had, when you talk about a 6'6" heavyweight with an 82-inch reach, and actually was solid for the fighter for that size back then. And we talk about how he got to this point. He goes up and faces the great Ali at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. The real story of this, and you go trace back to what took place in an ABC studio interview where Ernie Terrell called Muhammad Ali by his regular name of Cassius Clay. And we know why he changed it. I'm not getting into it. And called him a bunch of other names. Some of them I can't use my platform for obvious reasons. And they referred to him as another Floyd Patterson. And just kept on and kept on and kept on until the night of the fight. When you talk about this fight, Ernie Terrell did everything he could in the early rounds, but because of everything that took place with the mouth of Ernie Terrell and what happened with that studio where he called him every name of the book and some words I can't use, Muhammad Ali said, "The heck with it. I'm just going to beat you up." And exactly what he did. As the third round and shifted to the middle rounds, it started to show as both eyes of Ernie Terrell swell almost like the size of golf balls, because that's a beating Ali started to administer to the tough Ernie Terrell. And even though Ernie Terrell fought valiantly and courageously throughout this beating, because that's what it was, a beating, Ali was still beating him up. That's what happened. Anything Ernie Terrell tried, Ali did better times 20. And that was why the fight wound up the way it did. And we talk about scorecards. One was a 10-point win for Ali, one was a 15-point win, and another one was an 11-point win. An unanimous decision by Muhammad Ali. And halfway through the fight, one of the real poignant moments as Ali was administering this beating to Ernie Terrell, he asked him, "What's my name?" After what happened in the studio when Terrell called him by his regular name, Cassius Clay, Ali said, "What's my name?" and just peppered him with the jab and the 1-2s and just turned Terrell's face inside out in a way that no one thought Ali would have in him. And Ernie Terrell, a very solid heavyweight in the 70s, maybe the bottom half of the top 10 of that decade, was just no match. And it showed. And it didn't help what he pulled off in the studio to Ali's face, some of the words he used. And that ignited another fire that Ernie Terrell could not put out. That's essentially what happened when you talk about Ernie Terrell fighting Muhammad Ali at the Astrodome 59 years ago tonight. And it was a unanimous decision win. I mean, Ernie Terrell maybe won the first 2 rounds at the most. And even though he was competitive and he tried, they say it was good to great. And the good to great when you're facing a guy like Muhammad Ali is so much greater, you can't see it out of the naked eye. And that's what happened when this took place. That's why Muhammad Ali kept his portion of the title and won Ernie Terrell's portion to unify the two to become the undisputed heavyweight champion. And this performance was basically due to the accusations and everything that took place. Ali began to lose some popularity when the perception was he dragged the fight out, given what happened between the two in the studio, so he could further hurt Ernie Terrell, which Ali basically just denied, saying he had opportunities, which he had, because there were times Terrell was just terribly hurt. Ali could have finished him, but couldn't. But he even said, "I had to slow myself down because he didn't want to punch himself out," and continue to insult Ernie Terrell every single which way possible. And one of the things he called him was someone with no class, and calling him a joke to be a champion, which I'm not sure I want to go that far. But everything that happened from the studio to the beating to afterward, there was some animosity from what Muhammad Ali said to Ernie Terrell, and started by Ernie Terrell, obviously. And that was why we had what we had 59 years ago tonight at the Astrodome. And years later, Ernie Terrell said, "I regret it." Of course you're going to regret it. You had your face turned inside out. You couldn't see for about a week. There was a photo recently that went viral where both of your eyes were so swollen shut, it's like you had golf balls stuffed in them. You now said you regretted it. Of course you're going to regret it. You got the beating of your life, and you was never the same after that because he would never get to anywhere near that level. A couple subpar losses. The one last chance he had was in 1973 against Chuck Wepner, where Wepner did the same thing to him, beat him up on a points decision for a North American championship, and that was the end for him. But the thing with this one, maybe in its own way, it's almost sad, is this overshadowed what a solid heavyweight Ernie Terrell was. He can compete with anyone. When you have a 6'6" frame with an 82-inch reach, put him with the right trainer, you can get something out of it. Because we've seen 6'6" heavyweights. And before we had those kind of 6'6" heavyweights, one of the few, dimes of a dozen was Ernie Terrell. And he carved himself a nice career before all of this happened. And after all of this happened, that was the end. And it's sort of a shame because it overshadows no one's going to call it a Hall of Fame career or all-time great career, but a very, very good, solid, stern career that got him a heavyweight championship, and probably the lower half of the top 10 of the fighters that fought in the 70s because he held his own against several decent fighters, and that was Ernie Terrell. And it was unfortunate that he had to resort to the things he said just to get his face turned inside out by the greatest Muhammad Ali via a unanimous decision in a fight where basically the fight was over from the second round on. And Muhammad Ali just basically said, "What's my name? What are you going to call me now?" Taunted Ernie Terrell, beat him up, gave him a boxing lesson, and the rest was history. Solid fighter was Ernie Terrell, but they say the distance from good to great is substantial. Now we're going to talk about the distance between Terrell and Ali because it's indescribable. It's not a shot at Ernie Terrell, who was phenomenal, but there's a reason why they call Muhammad Ali the greatest, and that was why. May God rest the souls of both Ernie Terrell and Muhammad Ali. Hopefully they're making amends at the gates of heaven because that was just ugly what took place in that ABC studio and what transpired afterwards. And I conclude, speaking of beatings, I conclude with a fight. In hindsight, when you look back at it, maybe there's a reason why it took place, but maybe it shouldn't have. And I'm going to break down the reasons for it because a lot of people in the fight community don't get it. It took place 33 years ago tonight at Madison Square Garden. It was Riddick Bowe defending his heavyweight title against Michael Dokes. The corpse of Michael Dokes. It wasn't Michael Dokes. It was the corpse of Michael Dokes. Last time Michael Dokes was relevant before this, he was starched and knocked cold to near death by Donovan Razor Riddick on just 3 simple left hooks. And the third left hook hit Dokes so hard, you can almost see the muscles just collapse out of Dokes, and he's down in the position as if he was dead. That was the last time Michael Dokes was relevant. And he gets this title shot, and the spinoff was he got the title shot after Riddick Bowe threw the belt in the garbage can to Duck Lennox Lewis in London 2.5 months earlier. So in hindsight, before I proceed with this, Riddick Bowe threw a belt in the garbage can to Duck Lennox Lewis to fight the corpse of Michael Dokes in a nonsensical heavyweight championship fight, which we had quite a few of those in the 90s. And we think about what took place on that night in the particular fight, it made even less sense for this to take place. Because there was this 1-round beatdown where Dokes was just nothing. I mean, I couldn't even count 2 punches he threw. That's how one-sided this was. And a fight that had no business taking place. A title shot Michael Dokes never deserved because his 5 minutes of fame was up when Razor Riddick starched him. And we had this as a way for Riddick Bowe's people to mask what happened in London when he threw the belt in the garbage can to avoid Lennox Lewis, and use this fight It was actually free HBO. Of course, it had to be free because no one was going to pay 5 cents for it. And you had this. And because you had it, you were asking yourself, what was I doing watching this? Or whoever was at the fight was asking, why was I here? That's what Riddick Bowe versus Michael Dokes was. It was a way for Riddick Bowe to mask him not wanting any parts of Lennox Lewis, thinking he could get a one-round knockout of Michael Dokes in his own backyard, and as a way to say, I'm, I'm the man still. I can beat Lennox Lewis anytime, or my many other heavyweights. But maybe in the grand scheme of things, and maybe we go a little deeper on this. Maybe beating Evander Holyfield the first time when he won the title, weeks before he vacated one of the belts to duck Lennox Lewis, was Riddick Bowe's 5 minutes of fame, and just beat the sake of being called undisputed heavyweight champ after he beat Evander Holyfield, was the gratification and satisfaction for him. And that's why he resorted to the theatrics of the belt in the garbage can and taking this nonsensical heavyweight title defense. And maybe that's why Riddick Bowe's career slowly turned up the way it did. And the fight, people know what Riddick Bowe was. An immense talent who could do anything. And when he beat Evander Holyfield the first time, I thought he was going to have an interesting era because he had a 6'5" guy who was willing to mix it up. I mean, and he had the perfect punch for an inside fighter, which was the uppercut, which nearly sent Evander Holyfield to the moon. But the immense talent Riddick Bowe had, he was lacking in work ethic. And it showed after he beat Evander Holyfield in the first fight. And maybe when he beat Michael Dokes on this night in a fight that had no business taking place, it masked the real deficiencies of Riddick Bowe, which was a fighter who wasn't willing to go to the extra mile to become great. And because he wanted to go the extra mile, he was more than satisfied with beating Evander Holyfield in 1992 to win the heavyweight title. And that's why he threw the belt in the garbage can to avoid Lennox Lewis and then pursued a nonsensical heavyweight title defense against Michael Dokes. The same Michael Dokes who 3 years before was starched and looked like he was literally dead when he fought Donovan Razor Riddick. And one of the 15 all-time fights that we look back at it and you wonder why it took place. Maybe it took place because Riddick Bowe's people were trying to mask what Riddick Bowe really was. And what a way to do it against to have a name on your record. These are the kind of fights you take. If you're a young star coming up and want a name on the resume, you don't take these kind of fights as a heavyweight champion. And we consider Riddick Bowe's 2 title defenses against Michael Dokes and Jesse Ferguson, 2 fights that had no business taking place. Maybe at the end of the day, those 2 fights revealed more about Riddick Bowe than we thought. Because when you're a heavyweight champion and resort to fighting those kind of opponents, especially after what he did to Evander Holyfield, you want to talk about taking steps backwards. Maybe in hindsight, Riddick Bowe took steps backwards. Because, excuse me, to go from Evander Holyfield to finding the corpse of Michael Dokes, who Holyfield knocked out in a brutal fight in 1989. And then again, knocking out Jesse Ferguson in a fight that had no business taking place, just like the Michael Dokes fight didn't. Says tons about who Riddick Bowe is. And not just him, but his management team. Because after they won the title, they were about the theatrics. They were about the dollars. And if they had this public be damned approach that regardless of the criticism they faced, they was going to do things their way. And when they did things their way to the tune of how they did it, it basically masked the biggest thing about Riddick Bowe was he was talented enough to get to a certain point, but because his title defenses were against 2 guys who had no business fighting for titles, maybe that's why they took the fights they did. And that's why Riddick Bowe's career, sadly, ended up the way it did in the end. Because if you're going to fight for world titles, you better start trending upward. And Riddick Bowe didn't. an immense talent. I mean, he won a silver medal in the Olympics. He did something right in the '88 Olympics. Problem is, the gold medal winner was Lennox Lewis, who beat his brakes off of him. But so he did something right. But to get to one point and then get to another point like some of the all-time greats did, it takes a little extra in here. And maybe at the end of the day, Riddick Bowe didn't have it. That's why his two title defenses were against the corpse of Michael Dokes and the corpse of Jesse Ferguson, two guys who had no business fighting for world titles whatsoever. And the fact that HBO had to televise it, and I can see, I was watching the commentary, I see the look on the commentators' faces throughout them. They're looking there like, what are we doing here? Let's see Riddick Bowe against real competition. He didn't want any. And when he threw the belt, the garbage can to avoid Lennox Lewis, to fight Michael Dokes and Jesse Ferguson instead, the rest is history. May God rest his soul, Michael Dokes. I mean, before the Riddick fight, he was actually one of the more exciting fighters to watch. But after the Riddick fight, the guy was a corpse. And the fact this guy got an undeserved title shot speaks volumes as to what Riddick Bowe and his manager, Rock Newman, were all about. End of story. Actually, when he did, Albo put together a top 10 list of the fights that had no business taking place, and I could have an open platform because I could shoot a lot of this down in less than 2 minutes. And up there would be Riddick Bowe versus Michael Dokes. Plain and simple. And on that note, that'll wrap up this edition of All Era Sports with Sirhan. I will be back Monday for the Super Bowl recap. Programming reminder, next Wednesday, a 90-minute show, a dedication to the greatest upset and greatest one-hit wonder in pop culture and sports history. Some of you guys might figure out who that is, but I'm not going to give it away yet. And the theme will be upsets and one-hit wonders. But there's one guy next Wednesday that deserves all the credit, and the day is going to belong to him. Join in Wednesday night. And if you missed any part of this show or any of others in the past, you can catch them on the iHeartRadio and the Apple Podcast apps. For those of you who have those apps on your mobile devices, especially the iPhone users. And if you prefer the video version to see this thing going on while I stay warm in these frigid conditions, you can catch them on the X platform, the Facebook platform, as well as the Spotify apps, and even the Patreon app. Article coming up, couple articles coming up soon in the football field, especially after the Super Bowl that takes place. I will touch on the winner or whoever that is. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in every walk of life. Always take care of yourself first. Never let anyone step on your boundaries, and always respect other people's boundaries. You do all three of those things, all the good things would happen. Always respect other people's boundaries, but also never let anyone walk all over you. Set healthy boundaries for yourself, and all the good things will follow. Because if you don't, nothing else is going to matter. And on that note, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless. Enjoy the weekend. Good luck to the two Super Bowl teams, the fan bases of the Seahawks and the Patriots. May the best team win. I'll see you guys Monday night.